The town of Pine Ridge held its secrets like a miser holds gold, tightly, jealously, beneath layers of smiles and pleasantries that had calcified over decades. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when they're carried home in the eyes of a stranger who once belonged. When David Mitchell stepped off the Greyhound bus that misty April morning, no one recognized him. No one knew that 23 years earlier he'd been left to die on Elders Peak during the worst blizzard in Blue Ridge history. No one knew that the mountain had claimed him as its own, or that he'd returned to claim something back from the valley below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road into Pine Ridge curved like a question mark, winding between slopes thick with mist-shrouded pines. David Mitchell stood at the bus stop, breathing air that tasted nothing like the thin, crisp atmosphere of Elders Peak. Here, in the valley, oxygen felt heavier, laden with the scent of car exhaust, fresh bread from the bakery across the street, and something else, something human and complicated. His backpack contained everything he owned: 3 changes of clothes, a hunting knife with a worn wooden handle, a dog-eared copy of Thoreau's Walden, and a tattered blue baby blanket with the initials DM stitched in one corner. 23 years old, tall and lean, from a life spent navigating mountain terrain, David had never seen a town larger than the outfitter's settlement 30 miles north of Samuel's cabin. Pine Ridge, with its population of 4,628 according to the faded welcome sign, might as well have been New York City. The Timber Inn sat at the town's center, its windows steamed with the breath of morning coffee drinkers. David pushed through the door, triggering a small bell that announced his arrival with cheerful indifference. Conversations hushed momentarily as locals assessed the newcomer before resuming their steady hum. He claimed a stool at the counter, placing his pack carefully between his feet. "What can I get you, honey?" The waitress, Martha according to her name tag, had a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes and hair pulled back in a functional ponytail. "Coffee," David said, then remembered Samuel's lessons on manners. "Please." Martha poured the dark liquid into a mug and slid it toward him. "Passing through or staying a while?" David wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic. "Staying, I think. For a bit." "Well, you picked a good time. Spring festival starts next weekend." She leaned against the counter. "You looking for work? Because Wilson's Hardware is hiring, and Doc Jenkins mentioned needing help around his practice." The name sent a jolt through David's system. Jenkins. It was the first name on Samuel's list. Dr. Thomas Jenkins, the town doctor who'd been working the night of the Great Blizzard in 2002, the night a baby had disappeared. "Dr. Jenkins is still practicing." David kept his voice neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Oh sure, going on 40 years now, man refuses to retire." Martha refilled a customer's mug without being asked. "You need a doctor?" David shook his head. "Just curious, I heard the name before." The bell above the door chimed again, and Martha's attention shifted. David used the moment to study the diner's occupants, wondering if any of them had known Sarah and James Mitchell, the couple who'd driven up Elders Peak in a snowstorm and returned without their infant son. The couple whose car had been found abandoned near Whispering Pines Nature Reserve 2 days later with no trace of its owners. According to Samuel, the town had searched for weeks, assumed the family had been claimed by the mountain, had mourned, moved on, forgotten. "You got a place to stay?" Martha had returned, coffee pot in hand. "Not yet. Old Miller place is for rent. Nothing fancy, but the roof's solid." She scribbled an address on her order pad. "Tell Elaine that Martha sent you. She might knock off the security deposit." David accepted the paper with a nod of thanks, paid for his coffee, and stepped back into the morning air. The town was coming alive now, storefronts opening, cars filling the small municipal parking lot. The clock tower at the center of the town square showed 8:45, its face freshly painted, but the architecture speaking of decades, maybe a century of watching over Pine Ridge. The map Samuel had drawn was crude, but effective. David oriented himself using the clock tower, then headed east toward a modest residential area, where ranch-style homes sat on neat quarter-acre lots. The Miller place stood slightly apart, a small blue house with white trim and a front porch that sagged slightly in the middle. A woman with iron-gray hair was sweeping fallen blossoms from the walkway. She straightened as David approached, assessing him with a shopkeeper's practiced eye. "Help you?" "Martha at the diner said you might have a rental available." The woman, Elaine Miller, he presumed, propped her broom against the porch rail. "Martha needs to mind her business," she said, but there was no real heat in it. "Place needs work. 6-month minimum lease." "I can work, and 6 months is fine." Elaine studied him for a moment longer. $500 a month, utilities included. First and last month's rent up front. David had expected this. Samuel had insisted he take the money they'd saved from selling pelts and handcrafted items to tourists over the years. "A man needs capital in the world below," he'd said, pressing the envelope of cash into David's hands the morning he'd left. "Fair enough." David extended his hand, the way Samuel had taught him when they'd occasionally ventured to the outfitter's settlement. "David Mitchell." Elaine's hand froze halfway to his. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, shock, disbelief, before she schooled her features back to neutrality. "Mitchell," she repeated, completing the handshake with a grip that had turned tentative. "Any relation to the Mitchells that used to have the property out by Whispering Pines?" And there it was, the first thread of the past dangling before him like a lifeline or a noose. "Maybe," David said carefully, "I'm looking into my family history." Elaine's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Well, that's a name folks around here remember." She didn't ask for ID when they completed the rental agreement, didn't comment on his payment in cash, just handed him the keys with a strange, lingering look and said, "Town's got a long memory, Mr. Mitchell. Tread careful." The house was sparsely furnished, a couch with a faded floral pattern, a kitchen table with 4 mismatched chairs, a bed frame with a bare mattress in the single bedroom. David set his backpack on the kitchen counter and moved methodically through the rooms, checking sightlines, exits, the sturdiness of locks. Samuel had taught him to always know his surroundings. Samuel. The old mountain man's absence felt like a physical thing, a weight pressing against David's chest. For 23 years, it had been just the two of them in the converted forest ranger cabin on Elder's Peak. Samuel had taught him everything: how to hunt, how to read the weather in cloud patterns, how to set a broken bone, how to lose himself, in books salvaged from abandoned summer cabins. And finally, when David had turned 23, Samuel had told him the truth. "You weren't born to me, boy," he'd said one night as they sat before the fire. "You weren't born to the mountain either, though it claimed you sure enough." Samuel had been 52 when he found the baby, found David, half frozen in a car. Seat left near the trailhead to Whispering Pines Nature Reserve. A night of record snowfall, the roads already impassable, the temperature dropping by the hour. "Don't know what your folks were thinking, bringing an infant up there in weather like that," Samuel had said, poking at the fire. "But leaving you behind, that wasn't right." He'd taken the baby back to his cabin, kept him warm, fed him goat's milk from his small herd. Intended to bring him down to town when the storm cleared. But by then, the search parties had already found your parents' car, empty, no tracks leading away, Samuel had continued. They were looking for 3 bodies, not an old hermit with a baby that wasn't his. Days had turned to weeks. The mountain's winter had settled in hard, making the journey down treacherous, and something else had taken root in Samuel. Something like attachment, like purpose. Figured maybe you were better off with me than in some system, he'd concluded. Figured I could give you what you needed, food, shelter, learning. Left the deciding to you when you were grown. David had spent the last 6 months processing this revelation, asking questions, piecing together the fragments of another life, of parents he couldn't remember, of a town he'd never known, of a tragedy or a crime or something in between that had left him on the mountain and erased James and Sarah Mitchell from the world. Now, standing in this borrowed house in Pine Ridge, David caught his reflection in the bedroom window. Dark hair that curled when it grew too long, eyes the color of pine needles in shadow, cheekbones that could have belonged to anyone. A face that might contain echoes of strangers. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. He moved cautiously to answer it, habit making him check the sightlines through the front window first. A woman stood on the porch, middle-aged with auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Hello," she said when he opened the door. "I'm Emma Carter. I live next door." She offered the basket. "Welcome to the neighborhood banana bread. Still warm." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David accepted it awkwardly. "Thank you. I'm David." Elaine mentioned we had a new neighbor. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were curious, taking in details. "You settled in okay?" "Just arrived today, actually." "Well, if you need anything, directions, recommendations, whatever, I'm just over there." She pointed to a yellow house visible through a gap in the trees. "Lived here all my life, so I know where all the bodies are buried." She laughed at her own joke, then stopped abruptly when David didn't join in. "Figure of speech, sorry." "It's fine, I appreciate the welcome." Emma nodded, taking a small step back. "There's a town directory in the basket too. Phone numbers for essential services, that kind of thing." David thanked her again, and she retreated down the walkway, glancing back once with that same curious expression. He closed the door, set the basket on the kitchen counter, and lifted the cloth. The banana bread sat beside a booklet titled Pine Ridge Community Directory, its cover featuring the clock tower against a backdrop of mountains. He flipped it open, scanning the pages until he found what he was seeking. Jenkins, Dr. Thomas. Pine Ridge Medical Clinic, 415 Maple Street. The second name on Samuel's list was there too. Hayes, Sheriff William, Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department, 220 Main Street. And the third, Wilson, Mayor Robert, Town Hall, 100 Center Square. 3 men who'd been present the night the Mitchell's car had been found. 3 men who might have answers about what had really happened to James and Sarah Mitchell, and why their son had been left on the mountain to die. David closed the directory and moved to the window, looking out at the town that sprawled below him. Pine Ridge looked peaceful in the afternoon light, the clock tower's shadow stretching across the square, shoppers moving unhurriedly along the sidewalks. It was hard to imagine that this place held the darkness Samuel had described. The rumors of affairs, of threats, of money-changing hands, of a young couple who'd known too much or too little. Samuel had never claimed to know the whole truth. "I'm giving you what I have, boy," he'd said. "Scraps I've gathered over the years from newspapers, from gossip at the outfitter's store, from hikers passing through. It's not much, but it's enough to ask questions." David unfolded the map Samuel had drawn, smoothing it flat on the kitchen table. He'd marked the clinic, the sheriff's office, the town hall, the abandoned Mitchell property out by Whispering Pines. And in the corner, in Samuel's careful script, "Trust no one until you know who to trust." Night fell over Pine Ridge, wrapping the town in a blanket of darkness broken by streetlights and the occasional passing car. David sat on the front porch steps, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of civilization. Distant television sets, dogs barking, the low conversation of a couple walking past on the sidewalk. On the mountain, night. Sounds meant owls hunting, wind through pine boughs, the occasional cry of a fox. Tomorrow, he would begin asking his questions, would begin the careful process of excavating truth from beneath layers of time and convenient forgetting, would see if Pine Ridge welcomed home the son it had lost, or if it would try once again to bury him. David pulled the blue baby blanket from his pack, running his fingers over the embroidered initials, D.M. David Mitchell, a name given to him by parents he couldn't remember, in a life that had been stolen or sacrificed or simply lost to circumstance. "I'm here," he whispered to the night, to the town, to whatever ghosts might be listening. "I've come back." In the distance, the clock tower chimed 10 times, the sound rolling across the sleeping town like a promise or a warning. Time, it seemed to say, time moves forward. Time reveals all things. Time has finally brought you home. And somewhere in Pine Ridge, in a house David hadn't yet identified, someone who remembered the truth about that snowy night 23 years ago was about to have their peace shattered by the return of a ghost. David Mitchell had come down from the mountain, and nothing in Pine Ridge would ever be the same. The morning arrived with thin sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains. David woke instantly alert, a habit formed from years of mountain living where each day began with immediate awareness. He'd slept in his clothes, another habit Samuel had instilled. "Always be ready to move," the old man would say, even when there was nowhere urgent to go. Pine Ridge Medical Clinic occupied a single-story brick building 3 blocks from the town square. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old magazines, populated by a handful of patients flipping through outdated issues of People and National Geographic. A fish tank bubbled in one corner, its blue light casting rippling shadows across the linoleum floor. David approached the reception desk, where a woman with steel-rimmed glasses typed methodically at a computer. "I'd like to see Dr. Jenkins," he said. The receptionist didn't look up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." This earned him a glance. "Dr. Jenkins is fully booked today. I can schedule you for next Tuesday." "I'm not sick," David clarified. "I need to speak with him about something that happened a long time ago." The woman's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Dr. Jenkins doesn't discuss past cases. Patient confidentiality. It's personal. Tell him it's about the Mitchells and the blizzard of 2002. Her expression remained neutral, but David caught the slight widening of her eyes, the infinitesimal pause before she reached for the phone. "Your name?" "David Mitchell." This time there was no hiding her reaction. The name hit her like a physical force, causing her to draw back slightly before recovering. She spoke quietly into the phone, words David couldn't catch. After a moment, she hung up. "Dr. Jenkins can see you in between patients. Have a seat." David chose a chair, with a clear view of both the entrance and the hallway leading to the examination rooms. 20 minutes passed before a door opened, and an elderly couple emerged, followed by a man in his 60s, wearing a white coat over a button-down shirt and tie. Dr. Thomas Jenkins had thinning gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the deeply etched lines of someone who has carried responsibility for decades. The doctor approached, his expression carefully composed. "Mr. Mitchell? This way, please." David followed him down the hallway to a small office cluttered with medical texts, framed certifications, and family photos. Jenkins closed the door and gestured to a chair across from his desk. 23 years is a long time, Jenkins said without preamble, studying David with clinical precision. "But I see your father in your face. You knew him well." James was my wife's cousin, and I delivered you as a matter of fact. He removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. We all thought you died with your parents. I nearly did. A silence stretched between them, filled with unasked questions. Jenkins replaced his glasses, folding his hands on the desk. How did you survive? Someone found me, raised me. David kept the details vague, unwilling to expose. Samuel, I learned recently who I was, who my parents were, and now you're back. Jenkins leaned forward slightly. Why? To understand what happened to them. The doctor's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. A slight stiffening, a drawing inward. It was a tragedy. They shouldn't have been on the mountain in that weather. The car was found abandoned. The assumption was they tried to walk out, got disoriented in the storm. But no bodies were ever found. The mountain keeps its secrets, Jenkins said, a phrase that sounded rehearsed, too smooth after all these years. Search parties combed those woods for weeks. Eventually, we had to accept they were gone. And me? Did search parties look for a baby? Jenkins removed his glasses again, a nervous gesture. Of course, we looked for all three of you. Yet here I am. The doctor replaced his glasses, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. Indeed, a miracle by any standard. I'd like to know more about my parents, why they were on the mountain that night. Jenkins glanced at his watch. I have patients waiting, Mr. Mitchell. Perhaps we could continue this discussion another time. My home address is in the directory. Come by tomorrow evening, say 7 o'clock. My wife would be. She'd want to meet you. The abrupt dismissal confirmed what David had suspected. Jenkins knew more than he was saying. Whether that knowledge was benign or damning remained to be seen. Tomorrow at 7, David agreed, rising from the chair. One more question, Dr. Jenkins. Were my parents in some kind of trouble? Jenkins' face remained carefully neutral. What makes you ask that? Just trying to understand why they'd take an infant up a mountain road during a blizzard. Your father was impulsive, headstrong. Jenkins opened the office door. The weather turned worse than expected. They made a poor decision. It cost them their lives. It was the official version, David knew. The story Pine Ridge had told itself for 23 years. But something in Jenkins' eyes, in the careful precision of his words, told a different story. Thank you for your time, David said, stepping past him into the hallway. I'll see you tomorrow evening. He could feel the doctor's gaze following him as he walked through the waiting room and out into the morning air. The town square was busy now, locals moving purposefully between errands, tourists photographing the clock tower or browsing the artisan shops that lined the eastern edge of the square. David found a bench beneath an ancient oak tree and watched the rhythms of Pine Ridge unfold around him. Samuel had prepared him for this world, but in abstract ways. The old man had taught him history, literature, mathematics using salvaged textbooks, had shown him maps, explained concepts like government and commerce, had even, on rare occasions, taken him to the outfitter's settlement for supplies, allowing him brief glimpses of social interaction. But nothing had prepared him for the constant hum of humanity, the casual conversations, the subtle social cues, the ways people acknowledged or ignored one another based on invisible hierarchies. On the mountain, interactions were simple, direct, governed by need and the harsh realities of survival. Here, everything seemed wrapped in layers of subtext and history. Mind if I join you? David looked up to find a woman about his age standing before him. She wore jeans and a Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department polo shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. A badge on her belt identified her as Deputy Carter. Free country, David said, sliding over to make room. She sat, offering a hand. Olivia Carter. Everyone calls me Liv. David Mitchell. He shook her hand briefly, noting her firm grip. I know. Small town. She studied him openly, professional assessment mixed with personal curiosity. "My dad mentioned you'd rented the Miller place." "Your dad?" "Sheriff Hayes, he's my stepfather." She said it casually, but there was intention behind the information, letting him know her connection to the second name on his list. "Ah." "He mentioned Dr. Jenkins called him this morning, said you were asking questions about the Mitchell case." So they were watching him already, moving faster than he'd anticipated. "Not a case," David said carefully. "A family history." Liv's expression softened slightly. "Fair enough. Must be strange, coming back to a place you've never known." "It is." "Any other family still around? The Mitchells were pretty established here before." "Before they disappeared?" She had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That's what the reports say." "You've read them?" "Curiosity. It's the local ghost story, the family that vanished during the blizzard." She studied him. "Now it's a little less ghostly." David said nothing, letting the silence stretch between them. Samuel had taught him that silence often extracted more information than questions. "Look," Liv finally said, "I didn't come over here to interrogate you. Actually, I thought you might want to see the old Mitchell place. It's private property. Now technically, but the owner lives in Charlotte. Nobody goes out there much." The offer surprised him. "Why would you do that?" She shrugged. "Because if it were me, I'd want to see where I came from." David considered her, trying to detect a hidden motive beneath the straightforward offer. Her expression remained open, though not without a certain wariness. "When?" "I'm off duty at 4. Could meet you here, drive out together." She stood, adjusting her utility belt. "If you're interested." "I am." 4 o'clock then." She took a few steps, then turned back. "One piece of advice, Pine Ridge is like any small town. People talk, and they're already talking about you." Deej, with that, she continued across the square, stopping to chat with an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. David watched her go, re-evaluating his approach. If the town was already humming with his presence, he would need to accelerate his timeline. No more tentative inquiries. It was time to press harder. The sheriff's office was his next stop. The Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department occupied half of a municipal building shared with the fire department. Inside, a dispatcher sat behind a glass partition, monitoring radio traffic and computer screens. A bulletin board displayed wanted posters, community notices, and a child's crayon drawing of a police car. "Can I help you?" the dispatcher asked, sliding open the partition window. "I'd like to speak with Sheriff Hayes. He's out on a call, expected back around noon." David glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:15. "I'll wait." The dispatcher shrugged. "Suit yourself. Coffee's over there if you want some." David settled into a molded plastic chair and prepared to wait. Years of hunting had taught him patience, the stillness required to let prey come to you rather than chasing it. He pulled Thoreau's Walden from his backpack and opened to a dog-eared page, though his attention remained on the comings and goings around him. At 11:43, the door opened and a man in a tan sheriff's uniform entered. William Hayes stood about 6 feet tall, with a solid build beginning to soften around the middle and salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp. He carried himself with the casual authority of someone long accustomed to command. Hayes noticed David immediately, his eyes flickering with recognition, though they'd never met. He spoke briefly with the dispatcher, then approached. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, extending a hand. "I've been expecting you." David stood, taking the offered hand. "Sheriff Hayes. Come on back to my office, more private there." Hayes led him through a security door into a bullpen area with 4 desks, only one currently occupied by a deputy doing paperwork. The sheriff's office was at the rear, a glass-walled space with blinds that Hayes closed after they entered. "Coffee?" Hayes offered, gesturing to a pot on a small side table. No, thank you. The sheriff poured himself a cup, then settled behind his desk. So, David Mitchell, back from the dead, apparently. Mind telling me where you've been for 23 years? I was raised by someone who found me the night of the storm. Hayes's expression hardened. Found you and didn't return you to authorities? That's kidnapping, son. He saved my life, David said evenly, and he had reason to believe returning me wouldn't be safe. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. What kind of reason? That's what I came to find out. Hayes sipped his coffee, studying David over the rim of the mug. Dr. Jenkins mentioned you're asking questions about your parents. Yes, and now you're here asking me. You were first on the scene when their car was found. Hayes set down his mug. That's right. Got a call from a hiker who spotted the vehicle off Whispering Pines Access Road. I responded with 2 deputies. Car was empty, engine cold. No tracks because it had snowed all night. What did you do? Called in search and rescue, organized teams, spent the next 2 weeks combing those woods. Hayes leaned forward. I knew your father, you know. Not well, but enough. He was a good man, stubborn but good. What did he do for a living? Worked at the county assessor's office, handled property values, tax assessments, that kind of thing. Hayes's tone was casual, informational. Your mother taught 2nd grade at Pine Ridge Elementary. Normal people with normal jobs. Yet something had driven them up a mountain road in a blizzard with their infant son. Were they in some kind of trouble? Financial problems, disputes with anyone? Hayes shook his head. Not that I knew of. James was well liked. Sarah, too. Then why would they take that risk? The sheriff spread his hands. People make bad decisions, son, especially in panic. Maybe they thought they could beat the storm. Maybe they were heading to a friend's cabin. The weather turned faster than predicted that night. And no one ever found any trace of them? Or me? Something flickered in Hayes's eyes. A shadow of doubt or old guilt. We did everything by the book, every procedure, every resource. Sometimes the mountain just takes people. It was the same phrase Jenkins had used. The mountain keeps its secrets, as if the disappearance of 3 people could be attributed to some mystic force rather than human action or inaction. I'd like to see the reports, David said. The search documentation, witness statements, anything you have on file. Hayes picked up his mug again. Those records are archived, county storage facility. Take me a few days to dig them up. I'd appreciate it. I'll do what I can. The sheriff studied him. What exactly are you hoping to find, Mr. Mitchell? The truth. And if the truth is exactly what you've been told, a tragic accident, nothing more, then I'll accept it and move on. Hayes nodded slowly. My stepdaughter mentioned she offered to take you out to the old property. Might be good for you. To see it might help you understand. Understand what? That sometimes there are no conspiracies, no hidden agendas, just people who made a fatal mistake. Hayes stood, indicating the meeting was over. I'll work on getting those files for you. David rose, sensing he'd get nothing more from the sheriff today. Thank you for your time. One more thing, Hayes said as they reached the door. That person who found you and raised you, where are they now? He stayed behind. Got a name? David kept his expression neutral. Why do you ask? Hayes shrugged. Just curious about the man who raised James Mitchell's son. His name is Samuel, David said, offering the first name but withholding the last. A small protection for the old man who had kept him safe for 23 years. Samuel, Hayes repeated. Well, tell Samuel that Sheriff Hayes would like to thank him personally someday. The statement hung in the air between them, its surface courtesy masking something deeper, curiosity, suspicion, or perhaps genuine ingratitude. David couldn't yet tell. I'll pass that along, he said, then stepped back into the bullpen area. As he exited the building, David felt the weight of watchful eyes. Whether from the sheriff's office windows or from the townspeople, moving about the square he couldn't be sure, but the sensation prickled along his spine, a warning his instincts couldn't ignore. He checked his watch. Just past noon, with 4 hours before he was to meet Liv Carter, time enough to pursue the third name on Samuel's list. Town Hall occupied the north side of the square, a colonial-style building with white columns and a small dome crowned by a weather vane. The interior was cool and quiet, the marble floors echoing under David's boots. A directory board listed various municipal offices, with Mayor's office, second floor, at the top. A receptionist looked up as David approached her desk. "May I help you? I'd like to see Mayor Wilson. Do you have an appointment?" "No. Tell him David Mitchell would like a few minutes of his time." The name worked its magic again. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly before she reached for her phone, murmuring into the receiver. After a brief exchange, she hung up. "The mayor can give you 10 minutes. His office is at the end of the hall." She pointed toward a mahogany door with "Robert Wilson, Mayor" stenciled in gold letters on the frosted glass panel. David knocked once, then entered at the called "Come in." Mayor Robert Wilson stood behind an imposing desk, his hand extended in greeting. He was a tall man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with silver hair and the confident smile of a career politician. "Mr. Mitchell," he said as they shook hands, "what an unexpected surprise. Please sit down." David took one of the leather chairs facing the desk, noting the family photos arranged precisely on a side table. The framed newspaper clippings chronicling Wilson's 20-year political career, the view of the town square through wide windows. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment," David said. "When my assistant mentioned your name, I made an exception." Wilson settled into his chair. "The Mitchells were valued members of our community. Their loss was deeply felt." "You knew my parents personally?" "Of course. Pine Ridge is a small town. Everyone knows everyone." Wilson gestured to a decanter on a sideboard. "Water? Coffee?" "No, thank you." "So," Wilson folded his hands on the desk, "I understand you've already spoken with Dr. Jenkins and Sheriff Hayes." News traveled fast. Word gets around. "As I said, small town." The mayor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm curious, where have you been all these years? Living with the man who found me the night of the storm." "Found you where exactly?" "In my car seat, left near the trailhead." Wilson's face registered appropriate shock. "Left? Are you suggesting someone deliberately abandoned you?" "I'm suggesting my parents didn't have me with them when they disappeared." The mayor leaned back slightly. "That's quite a claim, not consistent with the official investigation, which you were part of." "I was a county commissioner at the time. Yes, I was involved in coordinating resources for the search." Wilson's expression grew solemn. "I personally authorized extending the search beyond the standard protocol. We were all desperate to find them." "But you didn't." "No, and it haunted this community for years." Wilson studied him. "Now you've returned, raising questions about a tragedy that most people have finally made peace with." "Ooh, not questions, just one question," David said. "What really happened to James and Sarah Mitchell?" Wilson sighed, a practiced sound of regret and compassion. "They died on that mountain, Mr. Mitchell. Perhaps not in the exact circumstances. Initially believed, but the outcome remains the same." "And me? Was I supposed to die too?" The mayor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what your guardian has told you about that night, but suggesting foul play does a disservice to everyone who searched for your family." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm trying to understand." Wilson checked his watch. "I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Perhaps We could continue this conversation another time, after you've had a chance to visit the Mitchell property and process things a bit more. Word of Liv's offer had reached the mayor too. The town's communication network was evidently efficient. Of course, David said, rising. Thank you for your time. Wilson stood, extending his hand again. His grip was firm, authoritative. Mr. Mitchell, a word of advice? Be careful about disrupting old wounds. Sometimes the healing, even if imperfect, is preferable to reopening the injury. I'll keep that in mind. And if there's anything I can do to help you settle in, please don't hesitate to ask. Pine Ridge takes care of its own. The mayor's smile returned, practiced and professional. Welcome home. The phrase followed David as he descended the town hall steps and emerged into the afternoon sunlight. Welcome home. As if Pine Ridge had been waiting for him all these years, as if the town had any claim to him after what had happened. He walked slowly across the square, processing the three conversations. Jenkins, Hayes, Wilson, each had offered the same basic narrative with subtle variations. Each had expressed shock at his survival, but accepted it with suspicious readiness. Each had suggested he accept the official story and move forward. And each had given off the subtle signals Samuel had taught him to recognize in the wild. The micro-expressions, the shifts in posture, the carefully chosen words that indicated when prey was aware of a predator's presence. These men were hiding something. Whether individually or collectively, David couldn't yet determine. But beneath their welcome and their sympathy lay something else: fear, guilt, or perhaps simple self-preservation. At 3:30, David returned to his rented house to retrieve something from his backpack. The blue baby blanket was carefully folded alongside his few belongings, its fabric worn thin by years of handling. He ran his fingers over the embroidered initials, then placed it in a small canvas satchel. He had just enough time to make one more stop before meeting Deputy Carter. Martha looked up from wiping down a counter as he entered the Timber Inn. The lunch rush had passed, leaving only a few customers nursing coffees and reading newspapers. Back so soon? She asked, reaching for the coffee pot. Just passing through. Quick question for you. David slid onto a stool at the counter. How long have you worked here? Going on 30 years. She poured coffee into a mug and set it before him. Seen 'em come and seen 'em go. Were you working here in 2002? During the big blizzard? Martha's hand stilled momentarily as she replaced the pot. You asking about the Mitchells? It wasn't a question. David nodded. I remember it, she said, lowering her voice. Terrible business. James and Sarah used to come in here Sundays after church. Always had that baby bundled up tight. Sweet little family. Did they seem afraid of anything? Anyone? Martha glanced around, then leaned closer. Why you asking all this? David hesitated, then decided on directness. Because I'm that baby. I survived, and I want to know what happened to my parents. She straightened, eyes widening as she studied his face. Good Lord, you do have James's eyes. You knew him well? Well enough to serve him coffee 3 times a week for years. She shook her head slowly. This is something. What do you remember about that time? Anything unusual? Martha chewed her lip, considering. James came in alone about a week before it happened. Sat right where you're sitting now. Looked like he hadn't slept. Kept checking his phone. Did he say anything? Not to me, but Mayor Wilson. He was Commissioner Wilson then. Came in. Sat with him a while. They talked real quiet. James looked, I don't know, scared maybe, or angry. Hard to tell sometimes with him. And Wilson? Cool as always. Left first. James sat another hour, just staring into his coffee. David absorbed this, trying to construct a timeline from these fragments. Anything else? Martha wiped the counter again, a nervous gesture. There was some talk after about property out at Whispering Pines. Big development that never happened. Some said James found something in the assessor's office that killed the deal. What kind of something? Don't know details, just whispers. She glanced at the clock. You better drink that coffee before it gets cold. David took a sip, though he didn't really want it. One more question. The night of the blizzard, was anyone looking for my parents before their car was found? Martha frowned. Not that I recall. Why would they be? Just curious. She studied him with newfound intensity. You be careful, you hear? Those questions of yours, they might stir up things best left settled. It was the third such warning he'd received today, from the mayor, from Sheriff Hayes, and now from a coffee shop waitress who had known his father's habits. Thank you for the coffee, David said, placing money on the counter, and for talking with me. You staying in town long? Martha asked as he stood to leave. Long enough to find what I'm looking for. She nodded slowly. Well, if you need anything, a decent meal, a friendly ear, you know where to find me. David stepped back into the afternoon sunshine, checking his watch. 3:55. Time to meet Deputy Carter and see the place where his story had begun and perhaps ended for James and Sarah Mitchell. He crossed the square toward their meeting spot, aware of eyes tracking his movement, of conversations pausing as he passed. In just one day, he had become the center of Pine Ridge's attention, the walking embodiment of the town's most enduring mystery. The question now was whether that attention would lead him to the truth or make him a target for those who had kept it buried for 23 years. Deputy Olivia Carter was already waiting at the bench, now dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, hiking boots, and a light jacket. She leaned against a forest green Jeep Cherokee, keys dangling from her fingers. Dr. de Sum. Da. Right on time, she said as David approached. Ready to see where it all began? David nodded, sliding into the passenger seat as Liv started the engine. They drove in silence through town, past neighborhoods of varying affluence, until the buildings thinned and gave way to stretches of woodland, broken occasionally by gravel driveways, leading to unseen homes. So, Liv said finally, you've met the town's power trio, Jenkins, Hayes, and Wilson. David glanced at her. Word travels fast, like wildfire, especially when it concerns the town's favorite ghost story suddenly coming back to life. She turned onto a narrower road, its pavement cracked and spotted with patches. Must be surreal for you. That's one word for it. Can I ask where you've been all this time? Or is that classified information? David considered how much to reveal. I was raised by a man named Samuel. He lives on Elder's Peak. The mountain Hermit, Liv said, nodding. People talk about him sometimes. Most think he's a myth, like Bigfoot. He's real enough. And he just happened to find you during the worst blizzard in 50 years? He didn't say it was luck, just timing. Liv frowned slightly. What does that mean? I don't know yet. That's why I'm here. She seemed to accept this, at least temporarily. The Jeep turned again, this time onto a gravel drive nearly overtaken by encroaching vegetation. A rusted chain with a no trespassing sign hung across the entrance, but Liv simply stopped, got out, unhooked it, and drove through before replacing it. County maintains access for fire safety inspections, she explained, and I've got semi-official business today. The drive wound through thick forest for nearly half a mile before opening into a clearing. In the center stood what remained of a modest ranch-style house, its windows boarded, its once white paint faded to a ghostly gray. A detached garage listed slightly to one side, its door hanging partially open like a broken jaw. Liv parked and cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the gentle afternoon breeze. The Mitchell homestead, she said quietly. Property's been sold twice since then. Current owner is some real estate investor from Charlotte who's waiting for land values to increase before developing. David stared at the house, his family's home once, trying to feel some connection, some echo of belonging. But there was nothing, just an abandoned structure slowly being reclaimed by nature. "Come on," Liv said, getting out of the Jeep. "We've got about an hour before we lose good light." The front door was secured with a padlock, but Liv produced a key from her pocket. "Sheriff's department keeps one for security checks," she said, working the lock. "Not that anyone comes out here much." The door opened with a protesting creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light penetrating between boarded windows. The furnishings were long gone, leaving empty rooms with water-stained ceilings and peeling wallpaper. Their footsteps echoed on hardwood floors as they moved through the abandoned space. "3 bedrooms," Liv narrated as they walked. 2 baths. "Pretty standard for the area. Your parents bought it in 1999, according to property records." David paused in what must have been the living room, noting the darker rectangles on the walls where pictures had once hung, protected from the sun's fading effects. "Were you part of the original investigation?" he asked. Liv shook her head. "I was 4 when it happened. Just remember my mom being scared by the storm, worried about my stepdad being out in it for the search." "Your stepfather, Sheriff Hayes, when did he marry your mother?" "About a year after my dad died. I was 3. She led him down a hallway toward the back of the house. "This would have been your room, I think." The nursery was small, its walls still painted a faded blue, though time and neglect had caused the color to crack and blister. A border of teddy bears ran along the ceiling line, barely visible now. David stood in the center of the room trying to picture his mother putting him to bed here, his father reading him stories, but the images wouldn't form. These people, James and Sarah Mitchell, remained abstractions, names without faces. "How much do you know about them?" Liv asked, watching him. "Your parents, I mean." "Almost nothing. Samuel told me their names, that they disappeared during the blizzard. That's about it." "I could help you find out more," she offered. "Old yearbooks, newspaper archives, people who knew them." "Why would you do that?" Liv hesitated. "Because everyone deserves to know where they came from." It seemed genuine, but David had learned caution from Samuel. Trust was earned, not given. "I'd appreciate that," he said, non-committal. They continued exploring the house, but there was little to see. Just empty rooms slowly surrendering to decay. Eventually, they stepped back outside, where the afternoon light had begun to soften toward evening. "One more place to show you," Liv said, heading toward a trail that led behind the house into the woods. The access road to Whispering Pines is about a 1/4 mile that way, where they found the car. David followed her along the narrow path. The forest grew denser as they walked, pine and hardwoods forming a canopy overhead. After about 10 minutes, the trail met a wider gravel road carving through the trees. "This is it," Liv said, stopping. Their car was found right about here, pulled over to the side. Engine off, keys in the ignition, no signs of struggle. David surveyed the area, trying to visualize that night. The blinding snow, the howling, wind, the desperate circumstances that had led his parents to abandon their vehicle with or without their child. And no tracks, no indication of which way they went. The snow covered everything. By the time the hiker spotted the car the next morning, there was close to 3 feet on the ground. "Who was the hiker?" Liv frowned. "I don't know, actually. Never thought to ask." "What about my car seat?" "It wasn't in the vehicle. Not according to the reports. The assumption was they took you with them, trying to find shelter. But they hadn't. Someone had placed him near the trailhead, far enough from the car to separate him from whatever had happened to his parents, close enough to the path that he might be found. Not an accident, a deliberate choice." "How far to the trailhead from here?" David asked. About half a mile that way. Liv pointed down the road. Want to see it? David nodded, and they continued walking. The road curved gently through the forest, eventually widening into a small parking area with a weathered sign marking the entrance to Whispering Pines Nature Reserve. A trailhead led into the woods, its pathway maintained but not heavily traveled. This is where Samuel found me, David said, surveying the area. 23 years ago. Liv watched him carefully. You believe that? I have no reason to doubt him. He saved my life. By taking you up the mountain instead of down to town. David turned to face her. You think he should have brought me here, to the same place my parents disappeared from? I think most people would have taken a half-frozen baby to the nearest hospital, Liv said evenly, unless they had reason not to. Like what? You tell me. You're the one who lived with him for 23 years. The challenge in her voice was clear. She might be helping him, but she remained a deputy sheriff, and the stepdaughter of a man potentially involved in whatever had happened that night. David stood at the Whispering Pines trailhead, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical force. The air felt different here, charged somehow, as if the molecules themselves retained the memory of what had happened 23 years ago. Samuel did what he thought was right, David said finally. He found an abandoned infant during a blizzard. The roads were impassable. By the time he could have safely brought me down, the search was focused on finding 3 bodies, not rescuing a survivor. Liv frowned, unconvinced. So he just decided to keep you, without ever checking if you had family looking for you? He made inquiries, discreetly. David knelt, touching the earth where he might have lain that night. He heard rumors about my parents, that their disappearance wasn't what it seemed. He believed returning me would put me in danger. Rumors from who? Hikers, hunters, people talk in the wilderness, especially to someone they think lives outside society's rules. David stood. He kept newspaper clippings, read reports about the search being called off, about the memorial service held when no bodies were found. Liv was quiet for a moment, processing this. And you never wondered about the world below? Never wanted to come down and see for yourself? Not until Samuel told me the truth. David met her gaze. I didn't know was from anywhere else until 6 months ago. Her eyes widened slightly. He never told you. For 23 years. He wanted me to have a childhood without fear, without looking over my shoulder. David turned, scanning the dense forest surrounding them. He planned to tell me when. I was 18, but then he got sick. Pneumonia, nearly died. After that, he kept putting it off. Why tell you now? Because I found the blanket hidden in his things. Started asking questions he couldn't avoid anymore. Liv studied him, her expression softening slightly. That must have been. I can't even imagine. It was like the ground disappeared beneath me. David looked back toward the road where his parents' car had been found. Everything I thought I knew about myself was suddenly a story with missing chapters. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest, the sound making both of them turn sharply. Probably an animal, but David's instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, shifted to high alert. We should head back, Liv said, checking her watch. It'll be dark soon, and these trails get tricky after sunset. They walked in silence down the gravel road, the emotional weight of the place following them like a shadow. As they neared the Mitchell property, David paused, looking toward the abandoned house barely visible through the trees. Why didn't anyone ever develop this land? It's good property, close to a nature preserve. Liv shrugged. Bad juju, I guess. First couple who bought it after your parents tried to renovate, but kept having problems. Contractors refusing to work after hours, equipment failures, that sort of thing. They gave up, sold to a developer who's just sitting on it. Superstition, Small towns thrive on it. She led the way back to the trail that would take them to the house, though in this case, maybe not entirely unfounded. Meaning? Strange things happen out here sometimes. Hikers getting disoriented when they shouldn't. Electronics failing. Some say they've seen figures in the woods at night. She glanced at him. Most folks avoid the area after dark. They emerged from the tree line into the clearing where the house stood, its weathered siding catching the late afternoon light. The Jeep waited where they'd left it, but something had changed. A fresh set of tire tracks in the dirt beside it. "Someone's been here," David said, instantly alert. Liv's hand moved instinctively toward her hip, where her service weapon would normally be holstered. Finding nothing, she scanned the area professionally. "Stay behind me." They approached cautiously. The house remained as they'd left it, door closed, padlock secure. The garage, too, appeared undisturbed. But the tire tracks told a different story. Someone had driven in, stopped briefly, then turned around and left. "Probably just kids," Liv said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Place has a reputation for being haunted. Teenagers come out here on dares sometimes." David examined the tracks more closely. "These aren't from a teenager's car. Heavy vehicle, likely a truck, fresh, within the last 30 minutes. Liv raised an eyebrow. "You can tell all that from tire tracks?" "Samuel taught me to read sign." David straightened. "Someone knew we were here, came to check, then left when they didn't see the Jeep. Or they saw it and decided to come back later," Liv said quietly. The implication hung between them. David's inquiries had attracted attention, perhaps unwanted attention. He glanced toward the deepening shadows around the property's perimeter, remembering another of Samuel's lessons. When you feel watched, you probably are. "We should go," he said. They drove back to town in tense silence, both scanning the road behind them for headlights that might indicate pursuit. None appeared, but the sense of unease remained, a prickling sensation at the base of David's neck that he had learned never to ignore. "I'll drop you at your place," Liv said as they reached the Pine Ridge town limits. "No," David decided. "The diner first. I need to talk to Martha again." Liv glanced at him, curious, but didn't question his request. She pulled up outside the Timber Inn, its windows glowing warmly in the early evening darkness. "Want me to wait?" she asked as he opened the door. "No need. I can walk back." Liv nodded. "Listen, about what happened back there." "Someone's watching me," David said simply. "I expected it." "Be careful who you trust," she said, the warning in her voice unmistakable. David studied her. "Including you." A small, wry smile crossed her face. "Especially me. I'm the sheriff's stepdaughter, remember?" "Why help me at all, then?" Liv's expression grew serious. "Because sometimes Pine Ridge feels like it's built on secrets, and I'm tired of living on a foundation that might collapse at any moment." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him since his arrival. David nodded, acknowledging her candor. "Thank you for today." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This is just getting started." The diner was busy with the dinner crowd, locals and a few tourists filling the booths and counter seats. Martha moved efficiently between tables, her experienced hands carrying plates heaped with comfort food. She spotted David immediately, giving him a slight nod as she finished serving a family of 4. "Back so soon?" she asked when she approached the counter where he'd taken a seat. "I visited the Mitchell property today," David said, keeping his voice low. Martha's expression tightened. "Find what you were looking for?" "Not yet, but I think I'm being watched." She glanced around the diner, then leaned closer. "That's hardly surprising considering the questions you're asking. I need to know more about what my father was involved in. You mentioned property deals, something he found in the assessor's office." Martha wiped the counter, a nervous, habit he'd noticed earlier. That was just talk, people trying to make sense of a senseless tragedy. "Please," David said. "Anything you remember could help." She sighed, looking suddenly older in the harsh diner lighting. There was a plan to develop land around Whispering Pines. Big resort, golf course, condominiums. Would have brought in millions, changed the whole character of Pine Ridge. "And my father was assessing the property values?" Martha nodded. "That was his job. But rumor was he found something that complicated the deal. Environmental issues maybe, or problems with the ownership chain. Whatever it was, he took it to the county commissioners, including Robert Wilson. Yes, there was a meeting, closed door. Next day, James looked like he hadn't slept in a week." Martha glanced toward the kitchen, aware she'd been standing too long in one spot. A few days later, the development was officially abandoned. Week after that, your parents were gone. The timing was suggestive, but not conclusive. "Do you remember the developer's name?" "Ridgeline Properties, I think. Owner was a man named Victor Blackwood, not local." David committed the name to memory. "And after my parents disappeared, what happened to the development plans?" "Never resurfaced. Land's been sitting untouched ever since." Martha straightened as a bell dinged from the kitchen. "That's all I know, I swear. Now I've got customers waiting." David ordered coffee he didn't want, using it as an excuse to linger in the diner, observing the patterns of local life. Families with children, elderly couples, teenagers crowded into booths, normal people living normal lives in a town that had buried its secrets beneath layers of routine and respectability. As he nursed his coffee, the door opened and Dr. Thomas Jenkins entered, accompanied by a woman about his age, with carefully styled grey hair and an elegant wool coat. They took a booth near the back, not noticing David at the counter. Martha approached their table with practiced hospitality, her manner slightly more deferential than with other customers. The woman, Mrs. Jenkins presumably, ordered with the confidence of a regular patron, while the doctor's attention seemed divided, his gaze repeatedly scanning the diner. Eventually his eyes found David. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a brief frown. He leaned toward his wife, said something that made her turn subtly in David's direction. Her reaction was more pronounced, a sharp intake of breath, one hand rising to cover her mouth. David paid for his coffee and stood, deciding to address the situation directly. He approached their booth, aware of Martha watching nervously from behind the counter. "Dr. Jenkins," he said with a polite nod, "I hope I'm not interrupting." The doctor cleared his throat. "Not at all. Mr. Mitchell, this is my wife, Eleanor. Eleanor, this is... I know who he is," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My God, you look just like James." David hadn't expected such a visceral reaction. "You knew my father well?" "Your mother was my cousin," Eleanor said, her eyes not leaving his face. "We were raised together, close as sisters. I was godmother to..." She stopped, emotion overtaking her. "To you." The connection surprised him. Samuel hadn't mentioned any extended family, likely because he hadn't known of their existence. "Please sit." Eleanor gestured to the empty space beside her. "Thomas said you'd returned, but seeing you in person is..." "Eleanor," Dr. Jenkins cautioned, but she waved him off. "Don't start, Thomas. He deserves answers." David slid into the booth, acutely aware of the attention they were attracting from nearby tables. Eleanor studied him intently, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We thought you died with them," she said. "All these years we thought." "I nearly did," David said quietly. "Someone found me, raised me." "Who?" Eleanor asked. "Who would take a baby and not..." She stopped, glancing at her husband, some unspoken communication passing between them. "A man named Samuel," David answered carefully. "He lives on Elder's Peak." Dr. Jenkins frowned. "The Hermit? He's not just a local legend then. very real, and the reason I'm alive." Eleanor reached across the table, hesitating before gently touching David's hand. "All these years, we held a funeral for you. There's a headstone in the cemetery, with your name on it." The thought was disorienting. His own grave, mourned over by people he'd never met. "I'm sorry for what you went through, for what everyone went through." Dr. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. "You've been asking questions around town about that night." "Yes. Are you sure that's wise?" Eleanor shot her husband a sharp look. "Thomas, I just mean," the doctor continued, "that reopening old wounds, they never closed for me." David interrupted. "I've lived my entire life not knowing who I really was or where I came from. I deserve the truth." A tense silence fell over the booth. Finally, Eleanor squeezed David's hand. "Yes, you do, and we'll help you find it." "Eleanor," Dr. Jenkins said, a warning in his voice. "No, Thomas, I'm done with the secrets." She turned back to David, resolution hardening her features. "Come to our house tomorrow evening as planned. 7 o'clock. I have things that belong to your parents, photos, letters, things you should have." David nodded, grateful. "Thank you. But," she continued, "you need to be careful. Pine Ridge isn't as simple as it appears. I'm beginning to understand that." Dr. Jenkins sighed, apparently resigned to his wife's decision. "If you're determined to pursue this, at least be discreet. Some questions are better asked in private." The warning was clear. Whatever had happened 23 years ago still held power in Pine Ridge, power enough to make a respected doctor nervous in a public diner. "I should go," David said, sliding out of the booth. "Thank you for your time, both of you." Eleanor caught his hand one last time. "You were loved, David. Whatever else you discover, know that. Your parents loved you more than anything." The words followed him as he left the diner and stepped into the night air. Loved, yet left in a snowstorm. Protected, perhaps, from whatever fate had claimed James and Sarah Mitchell. But by whom? And why? The walk back to the Miller place took him through the quiet residential streets of Pine Ridge. Most homes glowed with warm light behind drawn curtains, the inhabitants unaware of the past walking among them. David moved silently, a habit formed from years of hunting in the forest. As he turned onto the street where his rented house waited, a car rolled slowly past, its headlights dimmed. It continued to the end of the road, then turned around and drove back, passing him again before disappearing around a corner. Message received. He was being watched. The house was dark when he arrived, exactly as he'd left it. David checked the perimeter before entering, an instinctive precaution Samuel had drilled into him. Nothing seemed disturbed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there in his absence. He moved through the rooms methodically, checking the minimal belongings in his backpack. All present seemingly untouched, yet something had changed. The air felt different, disturbed somehow. David stood in the center of the living room, extending his senses the way Samuel had taught him. Listen beyond hearing, see beyond sight. There, a faint scent that didn't belong. Cologne or aftershave, expensive, with notes of sandalwood and something citrus, not a smell associated with Elaine Miller or her cleaning products. Someone had been in the house, looking but not taking. Searching for what exactly? David sat on the edge of the couch, considering his next moves. He'd been in Pine Ridge less than 2 days and had already stirred the waters enough to attract attention, both supportive and suspicious. He had names now: Victor Blackwood, Ridgeline Properties, a development deal gone wrong, parents who apparently loved him but ended up dead on a mountain road, a godmother he never knew existed, and watching him from the shadows, someone who didn't want these old secrets unearthed. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. David approached cautiously, positioning himself to the side before calling out, "Who is it?" "Emma Carter," a familiar voice replied. "Your neighbor?" I brought dinner. David opened the door to find Emma standing on the porch, holding a casserole dish. She looked past him into the darkened house, concerned. No lights? Did the power go out? I was just thinking, David said, stepping aside to let her in. Didn't notice it getting dark. Emma set the dish on the kitchen counter and flipped on a light. Shepherd's pie. Figured you might not have cooking supplies yet. That's very kind. Thank you. She waved off his gratitude. That's what neighbors do. Her gaze lingered on him a moment too long. You've had quite a day, from what I hear. The town's communication network at work again. News travels fast, especially when it's someone asking about the Mitchell case after all these years. Emma leaned against the counter. My daughter mentioned she took you out to the old property today. Your daughter? Olivia. Deputy Carter. She said you were looking for answers. The connection surprised him. You're Sheriff Hayes's wife. Emma nodded. Going on 20 years now. Married him a year after my first husband died. Another layer of Pine Ridge's interconnected relationships revealed. David reassessed the woman before him, not just a friendly neighbor, but the wife of a key player in whatever had happened 23 years ago. Did you know my parents? He asked directly. Emma's expression softened. Not well. We moved in different circles, but everyone knew of them. The tragedy was significant for Pine Ridge. Because of the circumstances? Because 3 people vanished without a trace. Emma studied him carefully. Except you didn't vanish, did you? You were hidden. The accusation wasn't subtle. Protected, David corrected, by someone who believed I was in danger. Danger from what? Pine Ridge is hardly a hotbed of criminal activity. I'm trying to figure that out. Emma's expression shifted, concern replacing skepticism. Listen, I don't know what you've been told about what happened to your parents, but be careful digging into the past. Some things are buried for a reason. That's what people keep telling me. Maybe you should listen, Emma said, her tone gentle but insistent. The past can't be changed, David. Whatever happened to James and Sarah, and I am truly sorry for your loss. Bringing it all up again won't bring them back. But it might bring them justice. Emma sighed. Justice is a complicated thing. In a small town, everyone's connected. Pull one thread, and the whole fabric starts to unravel. David considered her words, trying to determine if they contained a threat or merely advice. Thank you for the food, Mrs. Hayes. She accepted the dismissal with grace. Of course, and it's Emma, please. Let me know if you need anything else. As she reached the door, she paused. One more thing. William mentioned you're meeting with Dr. Jenkins tomorrow evening. If you'd like, we could have you over for dinner the following night. Might help to hear different perspectives on what happened. The invitation surprised him. I'd appreciate that. Emma nodded. Good. 7 o'clock then. Our place is the Blue Victorian on Maple Street. Can't miss it. She stepped onto the porch. And David, try to remember that not everyone in Pine Ridge is hiding something. Some of us just want to help. With that, she was gone, leaving David to wonder which category she fell into, conspirator or ally. The lines in Pine Ridge seemed blurred, relationships complicated by decades of shared history and small-town loyalty. He ate the shepherd's pie, standing at the kitchen counter, his mind working through the day's revelations, the development deal that his father had somehow disrupted, the strange reaction from Eleanor Jenkins, the tire tracks at the Mitchell property, the car that had followed him, the intruder who had searched his rented house. Someone in Pine Ridge was worried enough about his presence to take action. That meant he was getting closer to whatever truth lay buried beneath the official story of a tragic accident. After eating, David moved through the house, systematically securing it as best he could with the limited resources available. He placed a chair beneath each doorknob, positioned his backpack where it would make noise if disturbed, left a glass balanced precariously on the windowsill in the bedroom. Samuel's lessons in wilderness security, adapted for suburban defense. Finally, he unfolded the blue baby blanket on the kitchen table, studying the carefully embroidered initials. D.M. David Mitchell. A name given to him by parents who had apparently loved him. Parents who, according to everyone he'd spoken with, had been model citizens of Pine Ridge before their mysterious disappearance. Yet someone had left him to die in a blizzard. Someone had entered his house today, searching for what? Evidence of what he knew, or evidence of who he was. David refolded the blanket and placed it back in his pack. Tomorrow would bring new information, photos and mementos from the Jenkins home, perhaps insight into who James and Sarah Mitchell had really been, perhaps even clues to what they had discovered that made them flee into a snowstorm with their infant son. As he prepared for sleep, a final thought occurred to him. What if he wasn't the only one seeking answers? What if someone else in Pine Ridge had been waiting 23 years for the truth to emerge? The possibility added a new dimension to his search. He would need to look more closely at Pine Ridge's current power structure, at who benefited from the abandonment of the Whispering Pines development, at who had risen or fallen in the wake of his parents' disappearance. David stretched out on the bed, not bothering to undress or get under the covers. He wouldn't truly sleep tonight. Another lesson from Samuel. In unfamiliar territory with known threats, one rested in shifts, remaining partially alert even in slumber. Outside, the night settled over Pine Ridge, a blanket of darkness broken by streetlights and the occasional passing car. In houses throughout the town, people who remembered James and Sarah Mitchell were thinking about their son's return, wondering what it might mean for the careful equilibrium they had maintained for 23 years. And somewhere among them, someone was planning their next move in a game that had begun the night of the Great Blizzard, a game David was only beginning to understand. Morning arrived with grey light filtering through thin curtains. David had slept in 30-minute increments, his senses alert for any disturbance. None had come, though once around 3 a.m. He'd noticed a car moving slowly past the house, its engine a low murmur in the pre-dawn quiet. He rose, splashed water on his face in the bathroom sink, and considered his plan for the day. The meeting with the Jenkins family wasn't until evening, leaving hours to fill with further investigation. He needed to learn more about Victor Blackwood and Ridgeline Properties, about the development that never happened, about the interconnected relationships that formed Pine Ridge's power structure. For that, he would need resources beyond what casual conversations could provide. He needed documentation, official records, historical context. The Pine Ridge Public Library occupied a modest brick building 2 blocks from the town square. When David entered at precisely 9 a.m., he found it nearly empty. Just an elderly man reading a newspaper in the periodical section and a young mother helping her child select picture books. The librarian, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and tortoiseshell glasses, looked up from her computer as he approached the reference desk. "Good morning," she said with professional cheer. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm researching local history," David replied. "Specifically, development projects around Whispering Pines, nature reserve from the early 2000s. The librarian's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or wariness. "Any particular aspect you're interested in?" "A company called Ridgeline Properties and a man named Victor Blackwood." She nodded slowly. "We have local newspapers on microfilm going back to the 1950s. County development proposals would be in the public records section. And we maintain a local history collection that might have relevant information." She studied him more carefully. "Research for school or personal interest?" "Personal," David said simply. "I see." She rose from her chair. "Follow me. I'll show you where to start." The microfilm reader was an outdated model, requiring manual adjustment and patience. The librarian, Ms. Perez, according to her name badge, efficiently loaded the first reel, containing Pine Ridge Gazette issues from January through June 2002. "The search function is basic," she explained, demonstrating the controls. But you can scan through fairly quickly once you get the hang of it. Public records are in those filing cabinets along the back wall, organized by year, then by project type. Let me know if you need anything else." David thanked her and settled, in for what he knew would be hours of methodical research. Samuel had taught him the value of patience, the importance of thoroughness. Information was like tracking sign in the forest. One needed to observe everything, connect seemingly unrelated details, build a complete picture before drawing conclusions. He started with January 2002, scanning quickly through local news, births, deaths, and advertisements. Pine Ridge had been much the same then as now, a small town with modest ambitions, its rhythms dictated by seasons and traditions. In mid-February, he found the first mention of Ridgeline Properties, a front-page article announcing a proposed development that would transform Pine Ridge into a premier mountain destination. The accompanying artist's rendering showed luxury, cabins, a golf course, and a resort complex spread across hundreds of acres surrounding Whispering Pines Nature Reserve. Victor Blackwood was quoted extensively, describing his vision for sustainable luxury tourism that respects the natural beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains, while creating unprecedented economic opportunities for Pine Ridge residents. The article mentioned county commissioners expressing preliminary support, with then Commissioner Wilson calling it a potential game changer for our community. David continued scanning, finding several more articles through March detailing various aspects of the proposal, projected job creation, infrastructure improvements, environmental considerations. James Mitchell's name appeared only once, in a small article noting that the county assessor's office was conducting routine valuations of properties affected by the proposed development. Then, in early April, the tone changed. A small article, buried on page 4, mentioned potential complications with the development plan, citing concerns raised during the assessment process. No specifics were provided, but the article noted that county officials are reviewing documentation submitted by the assessor's office. The following week's issue contained a letter to the editor from James Mitchell himself, carefully worded but clearly concerned about proper procedures and due diligence in matters affecting public lands and watershed protection. The letter made no direct accusations, but urged citizens to remain vigilant about development that may have unforeseen consequences for our community's future. 2 weeks later, a terse announcement appeared stating that Ridgeline Properties had indefinitely postponed the Whispering Pines development due to regulatory complexities and changing market conditions. Victor Blackwood was not quoted. Then, on May 2nd, the front-page headline that changed everything: "Local family missing after blizzard." The article detailed the discovery of the Mitchells' abandoned vehicle, the massive search effort, the growing fears as days passed without signs of the missing family. Subsequent issues chronicled the search, its eventual suspension, the memorial service held when hope was finally abandoned. By June, the Mitchell family tragedy had receded from the front page, replaced by summer festival announcements and local sports coverage. The Ridgeline development was never mentioned again. David switched to the public records, pulling files for proposed developments in the Whispering Pines area. The official documentation was extensive, but oddly incomplete. Environmental impact statements, financial projections, and zoning applications were all present, but the critical assessment documentation from the county assessor's office, James Mitchell's work, was missing. In its place was a simple cover sheet noting materials withdrawn for review, 4/12/2002. No indication of what the materials contained or who had withdrawn them. More telling was what David found in the back of the file, a land ownership record showing that the parcels surrounding Whispering Pines had been owned by various entities, all apparently subsidiaries of a holding company called Blackwood Ventures. And the legal representative for Blackwood Ventures was a law firm called Wilson, Hayes and Associates. Robert Wilson and William Hayes, business partners before they became mayor and sheriff. David continued digging, finding more connections. Dr. Thomas Jenkins had served on the county health board that would have had to approve certain aspects of the development. Robert Wilson's construction company would likely have received significant contracts for the proposed infrastructure improvements. William Hayes, then a deputy, had been promoted to sheriff shortly after his predecessor retired unexpectedly in the summer of 2002. The power structure of present-day Pine Ridge had solidified in the months following the Mitchell family's disappearance. Finding what you need? David looked up to find Ms. Perez standing nearby, her expression neutral but watchful. "Getting there," he said, though some documents seemed to be missing. She nodded slightly. "County records management has always been inconsistent, especially during transitions between administrations." "Were you working here in 2002? David asked directly. "I was," she confirmed, studying him more intently now. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "No, but you might have known my parents, James and Sarah Mitchell." The recognition that crossed her face was immediate and profound. "You're—" She stopped, glancing around the nearly empty library before lowering her voice. "David Mitchell, the baby." "Not anymore," he said simply. Ms. Perez seemed to struggle with competing emotions, shock, curiosity, and something like relief. "Everyone thought you died with them." "So I've been told." She hesitated, then made a decision. "There's something else you should see, not in the official records." She gestured for him to follow her to a locked cabinet behind the reference desk. "We maintain a local history collection, personal accounts, photographs, items donated by long-time residents." From the cabinet, she withdrew a leather-bound scrapbook labeled Pine Ridge Gazette, Unpublished Materials, 2000-2005. "The editor was my brother-in-law," she explained, setting the book before David. "Not everything submitted to the paper made it to print, especially during sensitive times." She opened the scrapbook to a section marked April 2002 and pointed to a typewritten article with handwritten editorial notes in the margins. The headline read, "Assessor raises questions about Ridgeline property ownership, environmental compliance." "This never ran," Ms. Perez said quietly. "Too many potential legal issues, according to the publisher." David scanned the article quickly. It outlined concerns raised by James Mitchell about the actual ownership of certain parcels included in the development plan, as well as potential falsification of environmental survey data regarding watershed impact. The article quoted anonymous sources suggesting that powerful interests were pressuring the county to approve the development despite these concerns. Most significantly, it named Wilson, Hayes and Associates as the law firm that had handled the property transactions in question, suggesting a potential conflict of interest with Commissioner Wilson's public support for the project. "My father wrote this?" Ms. Perez shook her head. "No, a reporter named Michael Dolan, but your father was his primary source." She tapped a notation in the margin. "The editor wanted more substantiation before publishing something this explosive. Asked Dolan to get documentation from your father." "What happened to Dolan?" "Left town suddenly, about a week before your parents disappeared. No one knew where he went." Ms. Perez closed the scrapbook carefully. People don't talk about it much anymore, but at the time there were questions about the timing of everything and about what really happened to my parents. She nodded, her voice dropping further. Some people thought they ran, others thought, worse. She met his gaze directly. No one expected you to come back, asking questions they've spent 2 decades trying to forget. Who would want to stop this article from coming out? David asked. Beyond the obvious, Wilson and Hayes. Victor Blackwood was a powerful man with connections beyond Pine Ridge. The development was worth millions. She glanced toward the library entrance, suddenly nervous. That's all I can tell you. I shouldn't have shown you this at all. Thank you, David said genuinely. This helps more than you know. Ms. Perez nodded once, returning the scrapbook to its cabinet. Be careful, Mr. Mitchell. Whatever happened back then, the people involved are still here, still in positions of authority. I understand. I hope you do, she said, a genuine concern in her voice. Because history has a way of repeating itself in Pine Ridge. David left the library with a clearer picture forming in his mind. His father had discovered irregularities in the Ridgeline development, questionable property transactions involving the current mayor and sheriff, potentially falsified environmental data. He'd taken his concerns to a reporter. The story was suppressed. The reporter left town, and shortly thereafter the Mitchell family vanished during a convenient blizzard. It wasn't proof, but it was motive. The question now was, who had taken action on that motive, and whether they would do so again to protect secrets 23 years old. 7 o'clock found David standing on the porch of the Jenkins home, a handsome Victorian on one of Pine Ridge's more affluent streets. A light. Rain had begun to fall, misting the evening air and casting halos around the streetlights. He rang the bell, hearing its chime echo through the house. Eleanor Jenkins opened the door herself, a tentative smile lighting her face. David, you came. She stepped back, inviting him in. Please, come out of the rain. The interior was exactly what David would have expected. Tasteful furnishings, family photographs, the comfortable accumulation of a long, stable life. The house smelled of cooking and furniture polish, of permanence. Thomas is in his study, Eleanor said, taking David's jacket. He'll join us shortly. Would you like some tea or something stronger? Tea would be fine, thank you. She led him into a living room where a fire crackled in a brick hearth, casting warm light over leather-bound books and framed photographs. Please, make yourself comfortable. I'll be right back. Left alone, David moved to the mantelpiece, studying the photographs arranged there. Dr. Jenkins and Eleanor through the years, their wedding, vacations, moments with children and grandchildren. And there, partly hidden behind a more recent family portrait, a small silver frame containing a faded photograph of a young couple with a baby. David picked it up carefully. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, his mother, had a heart-shaped face and dark hair that curled at her shoulders. She was smiling down at the infant in her arms. Beside her stood James Mitchell, tall and lean, with the same green eyes that David saw in the mirror each morning. That was taken just before Christmas, Eleanor said from behind him. About 4 months before we lost them. David replaced the photograph carefully. You look like sisters. We practically were. Grew up 3 houses apart. Eleanor set a tea tray on the coffee table. Sarah was the sensible one. I was always getting us into trouble. Until she married my father. A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. James was considered something of a risk, brilliant but restless. Sarah's parents wanted her to marry a doctor or lawyer, someone established. Instead, she fell for the boy, who questioned everything. They were happy together, blissfully, and even more so after you came along. Eleanor poured tea into delicate cups. James would carry you around for hours, pointing out everything: trees, clouds, stray cats. He needs to know the world, he'd say. The image was painful in its normalcy. A father who would never have abandoned his child in a blizzard. A mother who, according to everyone, had adored her baby son. Dr. Jenkins mentioned you've kept some of their things? Eleanor nodded, her expression turning solemn. Thomas doesn't know I'm showing you all of this. He thinks it's better left in the past. And you disagree. I've spent 23 years wondering what really happened that night. She set down her teacup. The official story never made sense. James taking Sarah and a baby up that mountain in a snowstorm? That wasn't him. He was cautious, meticulous, especially with you. David leaned forward slightly. What do you think happened? Eleanor hesitated, glancing toward the hallway where her husband's study lay. James called me the day before they disappeared. He sounded frightened. Said he'd found something, needed to get Sarah and the baby somewhere safe until he could figure out what to do. Did he say what he'd found? Property records that didn't add up, environmental assessments that had been falsified. She lowered her voice further. Names that shouldn't have been involved. Like Wilson and Hayes? Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. You've been doing your research. Did my father mention where they were going? No, but he asked if we could meet him the next day. Give him a chance to sort things out first. She swallowed hard. We never heard from him again. And you didn't tell the police about this call? Of course we did, Sheriff Donovan at the time. But when we mentioned Wilson's name, she trailed off, shaking her head. Suddenly, the investigation shifted. Accident, they said. Poor judgment during the storm. Tragic, but not suspicious. Sheriff Donovan retired soon after that. Quite suddenly, Hayes took over. Eleanor met his gaze directly, and Robert Wilson's political career flourished. The pieces were falling into place. Wilson and Hayes had leveraged their connections to suppress James Mitchell's discoveries, possibly orchestrated the family's disappearance, then consolidated their positions in Pine Ridge's power structure. I need to see what my father found, David said. Eleanor nodded, rising from her seat. Wait here. She disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with a weathered leather briefcase. James gave this to Thomas the day before they disappeared. Asked him to keep it safe, not to look inside unless something happened to them. And did he look inside? Not until after the memorial service. By then it seemed pointless. James and Sarah were gone, you too, we thought. And the ridgeline. Development had been abandoned anyway. She placed the briefcase on the coffee table between them. Thomas wanted to destroy it. I wouldn't let him. Said someday someone might want answers. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I never imagined it would be you. The sound of a door opening down the hall interrupted the moment. Dr. Jenkins appeared in the living room entrance, his expression tightening when he saw the briefcase. Eleanor, he said, his tone a mixture of resignation and disapproval. I see you've made your decision. It's his right to know, Thomas. Dr. Jenkins sighed heavily, joining them by the fire. You understand, David, that what's in that briefcase might not only answer questions, it could raise new ones, dangerous ones. I understand. The doctor nodded slowly. Then I won't stop you, but I urge caution in how you proceed. The people involved, they're still powerful, still protected. David reached for the briefcase, feeling the weight of history in his hands. The latches were stiff with age, but opened with a decisive click. Inside lay a carefully organized collection of documents, property deeds, environmental surveys, financial records, and handwritten notes in what must have been his father's neat, precise script. James was methodical, Dr. Jenkins commented, watching as David began examining the contents. He built his case carefully before taking it to the newspaper. The documents told a damning story. The land parcels for the Ridgeline development had been purchased through a web of shell companies, all ultimately connected to a corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The true owner had been carefully obscured, but James Mitchell had managed to trace the connections back to a surprising source: Mayor Robert Wilson himself, in partnership with several county officials. More troubling were the environmental surveys. The originals, conducted by an independent firm, had indicated serious concerns about watershed contamination and erosion risks. But the versions submitted for county approval had been altered, with key warnings removed or minimized. Wilson was going to make millions from his own development, David said, understanding dawning, while using his position as commissioner to ensure approval. And Hayes, as his legal partner, was complicit, Dr. Jenkins added. A textbook conflict of interest, potentially criminal. But why involve Blackwood at all? Frontman, Eleanor suggested. Someone with development, experience to make it all seem legitimate. David continued through the documents, finding correspondence between James Mitchell and Michael Dolan, the reporter. They had arranged to meet the night of the blizzard at a cabin near Whispering Pines, where James would hand over the complete documentation. He never made it to that meeting, David said quietly. No, Dr. Jenkins confirmed. Their car was found about half a mile from the turnoff to Dolan's cabin. The final document in the briefcase was a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Sarah and David, if necessary." David held it, feeling the weight of his father's final words in his hands. "Should we give you privacy?" Eleanor asked gently. David shook his head. "You've kept these secrets long enough." He broke the seal carefully and unfolded a single sheet of paper covered in the same neat handwriting. The letter was dated April 30, 2002, the day before the Mitchell family disappeared. "My dearest Sarah and David, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I pray it never comes to that, but I've learned enough about the people we're dealing with to take precautions. The documents I've assembled prove that Robert Wilson and William Hayes have orchestrated a massive fraud, purchasing protected land through shell companies, falsifying environmental reports, and using their positions to push through a development that will make them millions while potentially causing irreparable harm to our watershed. Tubin, I've arranged to meet with Michael Dolan tonight to hand over everything. By morning, the whole story should break in the Gazette. With public exposure, we should be safe. But if something happens to me, know that I've left copies of everything with Thomas. The truth will come out one way or another. Sarah, if I don't return, take David and go to your cousin in Charlotte. Don't trust anyone in Pine Ridge until this is resolved. David, if by some terrible chance you're reading this years from now, know that your mother and I loved you more than life itself. Whatever choices we made to protect you. All my love. James. David lowered the letter, the final pieces falling into place. They were trying to reach the meeting with Dolan when something happened. Either the storm or someone intercepted them. James called me around 8 that night, Dr. Jenkins said quietly. Said they were on their way to the meeting but worried about being followed. Asked me to be ready if they needed help. That was the last time you heard from them? The doctor nodded. The blizzard hit around 9. Phone lines went down. By morning, their car had been found abandoned. And me, why would they leave me at the trailhead? Eleanor touched his hand gently. Maybe they didn't. Maybe someone found you in the car and moved you. Someone who didn't want you found with them. The implication hung in the air that James and Sarah Mitchell had been deliberately targeted that night, their disappearance no accident of weather and poor judgment. I should go, David said, carefully returning the documents to the briefcase. "I need time to process all this." "Take it with you," Eleanor insisted. "It's yours now, your inheritance." Dr. Jenkins frowned. "Eleanor, no, Thomas. We've kept this silent too long." She turned to David. "Just be careful. The same people who wanted these documents buried 23 years ago are still in power today." "I understand." David secured the briefcase. "Thank you, both of you." At the door, Eleanor embraced him suddenly, fiercely. "You were loved, David. Never doubt that. And having you back, seeing the man you've become, it would have made them so proud." The night air felt colder as David walked back through town, the briefcase clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The pieces were coming together. His father's discovery, the arranged meeting with a reporter, the desperate flight through a blizzard, the abandoned car. But critical questions remained. What had happened on that mountain road? Where were James and Sarah's bodies? And most importantly, who had moved baby David to the trailhead, separating him from whatever fate had befallen his parents? Lost in thought, David nearly missed the car following him, a black SUV moving slowly about half a block behind, its headlights dimmed. When he turned a corner, it followed. When he quickened his pace, it accelerated slightly to maintain the distance. Message received. His activities had not gone unnoticed. Rather than leading the tail back to his rented house, David cut through a park, using the darkness and his wilderness training to disappear among the trees. He circled back, watching from cover as the SUV cruised slowly past, the driver scanning the sidewalks for his missing quarry. When the vehicle finally moved on, David took a circuitous route back to the Miller place, alert for any signs of surveillance or intrusion. The house appeared undisturbed, but he entered cautiously, checking his improvised security measures. The glass on the windowsill remained in place. The chair beneath the doorknob hadn't moved, but something felt wrong. The same subtle wrongness he'd sensed the previous night. Someone had been here again. David moved through the rooms methodically, checking his minimal belongings. His backpack appeared untouched, but when he examined the blue baby blanket, he noticed a corner had been folded differently than he'd left it. A small detail, imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent years developing wilderness awareness. They were looking for something they believed he possessed. The briefcase, it had to be. James Mitchell's evidence against Wilson and Hayes, evidence that had been safely hidden for 23 years until David's return, had prompted Eleanor Jenkins to retrieve it. He needed a secure place for the documents, somewhere his watchers wouldn't think to look, and he needed to accelerate his plans. The dinner with Sheriff Hayes and his wife tomorrow night would be too late. His investigation had already triggered a response. David retrieved his backpack, transferring the most critical documents to a waterproof pouch Samuel had given him for carrying important items in the wilderness. The blue baby blanket went back in the pack, along with his few clothes and Thoreau's Walden. The empty briefcase he left prominently on the kitchen table, a message to whoever had been searching his home. "I have what you're looking for, and I know what you did." Now he needed an ally, someone not directly connected to Pine Ridge's power structure, someone with reason to question the official narrative of the Mitchell tragedy. Deputy Olivia Carter, Hayes' stepdaughter, but not his blood, a woman who had admitted her own dissatisfaction with Pine Ridge's foundation of secrets, someone who had access to official resources but existed somewhat outside the town's entrenched hierarchy. He found her number in the community directory and dialed, from the house phone, keeping his voice low. "Deputy Carter. It's David Mitchell. I need to meet with you tonight." A pause. "Official police business?" "In a manner of speaking. It concerns your stepfather." Another pause, longer this time. "When and where?" "The Timber Inn, 30 minutes." He hesitated, then added, "Come alone, and if anyone asks, you haven't heard from me." That sounds ominous. Her tone was cautious, but not dismissive. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "Not yet, but after tonight, we both might." He ended the call, knowing the cryptic message would either intrigue her enough to come or send her straight to Hayes. Either way, he would have his answer about whether she could be trusted. The Timber Inn was nearly deserted at this hour, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an elderly man nursing coffee in a corner booth. Martha looked up from wiping down the counter, surprise and concern crossing her face as David entered. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said quietly as he took a seat at the counter. "In a way, I have." He ordered coffee he didn't want, maintaining the appearance of a normal late-night customer. "Martha, did you know Michael Dolan, the reporter?" Her hand stilled. "Mike?" Sure, everybody knew Mike. Came in here almost every day when he was working on a story. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "Why are you asking about him?" "He was supposed to meet my father the night of the blizzard, to receive documents about the Ridgeline development." Martha's eyes widened slightly. "So that's what they were up to. You knew they were meeting?" "Not exactly, but Mike was in here earlier that day, nervous as a cat. Kept checking his watch, looking at the weather reports." She sighed, shaking her head. "Next day, when they found your parents' car empty, he was gone too. Left town without a word." "Did he ever come back? Contact anyone?" "Not that I heard." Martha poured coffee without being asked. Though there was talk, a few months later, someone said they'd seen him in Asheville looking rough. Then nothing. The bell above the door chimed. Olivia Carter entered, still in uniform, her expression guarded as she scanned the diner and spotted David. She approached the counter, nodding to Martha before taking the stool beside him. "This better be good," she said quietly. "I'm supposed to be on patrol." "It is." David glanced at Martha. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Martha hesitated, then nodded toward a door marked "Office" behind the counter. "Frank's gone home for the night. You can use his office. Just don't touch anything." David led Liv to the small, cluttered room and closed the door. He placed the waterproof pouch on the desk between them. "What is this?" Liv asked. "Evidence that your stepfather and Mayor Wilson were involved in fraud, environmental violations, and possibly the disappearance of my parents." Liv's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's all here. Property records showing Wilson as the true owner of the Ridgeline development land, falsified environmental surveys, proof of conflicts of interest." David met her gaze. "Directly. All compiled by my father before he disappeared." She stared at him for a long moment, then reached for the documents. "May I?" David nodded, watching as she methodically examined each item, her law enforcement training evident in her thorough review. Her expression remained neutral, but he could see the impact of the information in the tightening of her jaw, the slight widening of her eyes at particularly damning passages. "Where did you get these?" she asked finally. "Dr. Jenkins. My father left them with him for safekeeping the day before the blizzard." "And Jenkins kept them all these years? Never turned them over to authorities?" "The authorities were compromised." "Still are?" David leaned forward. "Someone's been following me since yesterday, searching my rental house when I'm gone. They know I have these documents now." Liv set the papers down carefully. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Help me find out what really happened to my parents. Use your access to police resources to look into the original investigation, to find Michael Dolan, if he's still alive. You're asking me to investigate my own stepfather. I'm asking you to seek the truth, whatever it may be." Liv stood, pacing the small office. "Do you know what you're really suggesting? That two of the most respected men in Pine Ridge conspired to, what? Murder your parents over a development deal?" The evidence of fraud is clear, David said, calmly. What happened afterward is what we need to determine. And if I refuse? Not the patrol car, Liv's personal jeep. She emerged alone, glancing around alertly before approaching the cabin. Any problems? David asked as he let her in. Not yet, but we don't have much time. She set a laptop on the table, along with a thick folder stamped confidential. Hayes knows something's up. He called to ask why I accessed the Mitchell case files. What did you tell him? That I was curious after meeting you. Said I wanted to understand the history better. Liv shook her head. He didn't believe me. I could hear it in his voice. What did you find? She opened the folder, spreading photographs and reports across the table. The official investigation was a masterclass in misdirection. Critical evidence ignored. Witness statements contradicting the timeline. Search areas deliberately shifted away from where they should have focused. And my parents? Liv hesitated. There's no concrete proof they're dead, David. No bodies were ever found. No blood evidence in the car. Nothing conclusive. The implication hung in the air. A possibility David had not seriously considered. You think they could be alive? I don't know, but I found this. She pulled out a report, dated 3 weeks after the disappearance. A gas station attendant in Tennessee reported seeing a couple matching your parents' description, acting nervous, driving a car with North Carolina plates that weren't registered to them. He called it in because the woman seemed distressed. Was it followed up? Supposedly, but the investigator assigned was Hayes himself. His report states he found nothing. Case closed. David absorbed this, the possibilities restructuring his understanding of what might have happened that night. And Dolan, the reporter. That's where it gets interesting. Liv opened the laptop. I ran his name through law enforcement databases. Michael Dolan legally changed his name to Mark Davidson in 2003. He's living in Seattle now, working as an environmental consultant. She turned the screen toward David, showing a professional photo of a man in his 50s with graying hair and watchful eyes. I called him using a burner phone. When I mentioned the Mitchells and Pine Ridge, he hung up immediately, called back 10 minutes later from a different number, asking who I really was. Took some convincing, but he finally agreed to talk. What did he say? That he's been waiting for this call for 23 years, that he knows what happened that night because he was there, hidden in the trees, watching when your parents arrived at the meeting point. David felt his pulse quicken. And? Hayes and Wilson were waiting for them. There was an argument. Your father refused to hand over the documents. Then, Liv paused, her expression grave. Shots were fired. Dolan fled, believing your parents had been killed. He never came forward because he feared he'd be next. But no bodies were ever found, David said slowly. Exactly. And the reported sighting in Tennessee weeks later suggests at least the possibility that they survived somehow. Liv leaned forward intently. Dolan said something else too, that your parents were frantically searching their car when they arrived, becoming increasingly desperate. He thinks they realized you weren't with them. Someone had already taken me from the car, David said, the pieces fitting together. Left me at the trailhead where Samuel found me. But who? And why separate you from your parents like that? Before David could respond, his attention snapped to the window. Headlights appeared on the approach road, not one vehicle, but two, moving slowly, deliberately. We have company, he said quietly, immediately extinguishing the lantern. Liv moved to the window, peering through the darkness. Sheriff's Department cruiser, and behind it, that's Hayes's personal truck. How would they know to look here? She met his gaze, realization dawning. The patrol car has GPS. If Hayes checked my locations from last night. David gathered the documents quickly. shoving them into his backpack along with the blue blanket. Is there another way out? Back door leads to a trail through the woods, about half a mile to the main road. Liv drew her service weapon. I'll stall them. You go. They'll know you helped me. I'll handle it. Go. Find Dolan. He's expecting your call. She pressed a piece of paper into his hand. His number. Now move. The vehicles were approaching the final bend in the drive. David hesitated only a moment longer, then moved to the back door, pausing to look back at Liv, a deputy preparing to confront her own stepfather, risking her career and perhaps more to help uncover the truth. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded once. "Good luck." David slipped into the darkness as the first vehicle pulled up to the cabin. The night enveloped him, familiar and sheltering. 23 years of mountain living had taught him how to move silently, how to become invisible in the trees. Behind him, voices rose, Liv's first, then Hayes, then another he didn't recognize. Questions, demands, accusations, then a different sound that made him freeze momentarily. The distinctive pop of a gunshot, followed by a second. Every instinct screamed for him to go back, to help Liv. But Samuel's most important lesson echoed in his mind. Sometimes survival means making the hardest choice, to keep moving forward when everything in you wants to turn back. David pressed onward through the darkness, his path illuminated only by starlight filtering through the trees. The road appeared ahead, empty and silent. He followed it north, away from Pine Ridge, his pace steady and purposeful. The truth about his parents, whether they had died that night or somehow escaped, lay with Michael Dolan in Seattle. And beyond that, perhaps, with finding out if the Tennessee sighting had been real, if James and Sarah Mitchell had somehow survived their encounter with Hayes and Wilson. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, David reached the outskirts of the neighboring town. From a gas station payphone, he dialed the number Liv had given him. "Hello?" A cautious male voice answered. "My name is David Mitchell," he said. The Seattle rain fell in a gentle mist as David stood outside the modest bungalow. 3 weeks had passed since his escape from Pine Ridge. 3 weeks of careful travel, avoiding main roads and credit cards, moving like a ghost across the country. The lessons Samuel had taught him about remaining undetected had served him well. Michael Dolan, now Mark Davidson, opened the door before David could knock. "I've been watching for you," he said, stepping aside to allow entry. His eyes held the wary look of a man who had spent decades looking over his shoulder. Inside, the living room walls were covered with news clippings, maps, and photographs, a physical manifestation of obsession spanning 23 years. At the center hung a faded photograph of James and Sarah Mitchell. "You have his eyes," Dolan said, studying David intently. "I wasn't sure I'd believe it, but there's no question. You're their son." "Tell me everything," David said, "from the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Then I'll know where you stand, and I'll find another way." She studied him intently. "You really believe Samuel raised you all these years to protect you from people in Pine Ridge who wanted you dead?" "I believe my father uncovered something, dangerous enough that someone ensured he couldn't reveal it. I believe my mother died trying to protect me, and I believe Samuel found me and made a choice that saved my life." Liv continued pacing, internal conflict evident in her movements. Finally, she stopped. "I can access the original case files, the complete versions, not the sanitized summaries. But I need time and I need you to stay out of sight until I have something concrete. I have dinner with your parents tomorrow night." She shook her head emphatically. "Cancel. Make an excuse. If Hayes suspects you know anything, you could be in danger. He already suspects. That's why I'm being followed. All the more reason to lie low." Liv ran a hand through her hair, thinking rapidly. "There's a cabin at the edge of town. belongs to my grandmother, but she's in Florida for the winter. You can stay there while I dig into this. You're taking a risk. Maybe, or maybe I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago." She met his gaze squarely. "I grew up hearing whispers, seeing looks exchanged when certain topics came up. Pine Ridge has always felt off to me somehow. Like the whole town was constructed over a sinkhole no one wants to acknowledge." David gathered the documents, returning them to the waterproof pouch. "When can you get me to this cabin?" "Now, my patrol car's outside. I'll drive you to your place to get your things, then to the cabin." She held out her hand. "But I need your complete cooperation. No lone wolf investigating, no confronting anyone. Let me handle this properly." David hesitated, then shook her hand. Agreed, for now. They left through the diner's back door, avoiding potential observers at the front. Martha watched them go, concern etched on her face. But she asked no questions. The night had turned colder, a light drizzle making the streets shine beneath the limited illumination of Pine Ridge's streetlights. Liv's patrol car was parked in the alley, engine running. "Get in," she said, scanning the area professionally. "Stay low until we're out of town." David complied, ducking down in the passenger seat as Liv pulled onto Main Street and headed toward the residential area where the Miller place waited. They drove in tense silence, both alert for signs of surveillance or pursuit. The house was dark when they arrived, exactly as David had left it. "Wait here," Liv instructed, drawing her service weapon before approaching the front door. She returned minutes later. "All clear. Get your things quickly." David retrieved his backpack, adding a few essential items from the kitchen. The briefcase remained untouched on the table, a deliberate challenge to whoever had been searching. The house. Let them wonder what he'd done with the contents. "Ready," he said, rejoining Liv at the patrol car. They drove through Pine Ridge's darkened streets, past the town square with its illuminated clock tower, beyond the last streetlight at the edge of town, and onto a narrow road that wound into the foothills. After about 10 minutes, Liv turned onto an unmarked gravel drive, nearly hidden by overgrown vegetation. A small cabin emerged from the darkness, rustic but well-maintained, with a covered porch and chimney. "It's not much," Liv said, killing the engine, "but it's off the grid. No one will think to look for you here." The interior was simple, a main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, and a door leading to what David presumed was a bedroom. Hunting trophies and fishing gear decorated the walls, along with faded photographs of a younger Sheriff Hayes beside an older man, both displaying proud catches. "My grandfather's place," Liv explained, switching on a battery-powered lantern. "He taught me to fish here before he passed. Hayes never comes out here. Too many memories of the man whose daughter he married." David set his backpack on a worn leather couch. "How long?" "Give me 48 hours. I need to access the original case files, track down anyone still alive who was involved in the search." She checked her watch. "I'll have to get back to my patrol route soon, or questions will be asked. And if you find nothing?" Liv's expression was solemn. "Then we'll know the official story might be true after all. A tragic accident, nothing more. And if you find evidence of foul play, then we take it to the state police. This would be beyond local jurisdiction." She handed him a prepaid cell phone. "My number's programmed in. Use it only in emergency." Before leaving, she hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth, I hope you're wrong about all this. Hayes has been the only father I've known since I was 3. I don't want to believe he could be involved in something like this." "Neither do I," David said honestly. "For your sake." After Liv departed, David secured the cabin as best he could, his wilderness instincts translating to this new environment. He built a small fire, In the fireplace, its warmth a comfort against the damp chill that had settled in the mountains. Sitting before the flames, he spread out the documents once more, studying them methodically, looking for details he might have missed. The story they told was clear: corruption, greed, environmental disregard. But they didn't answer the central question: what had happened to James and Sarah Mitchell on that snow-covered mountain road 23 years ago? The answer, David suspected, lay with Michael Dolan, the reporter who had fled Pine Ridge immediately after the Mitchells' disappearance. If Dolan was still alive, he might be the key to unlocking the final piece of the puzzle. As the night deepened, David's thoughts turned to Samuel. The old man would be in his cabin on Elder's Peak, perhaps sitting before his own fire, wondering how his adopted son was faring in the world below. David wished he could share what he'd discovered, seek the old man's counsel on how to proceed. Samuel had prepared him for many things: how to hunt, how to navigate, how to survive in the wilderness. But he hadn't prepared him for the complexity of human corruption, for the way power insulated itself from consequences, for the long reach of old crimes. Tomorrow, Liv would begin her investigation, and David would wait, as Samuel had taught him, patient, alert, ready to act when the moment came. The truth about his parents' fate had remained buried for 23 years. A few more days would make little difference. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the cabin roof in a steady rhythm. Inside, before the fire's glow, David unfolded the blue baby blanket, running his fingers over the embroidered initials, D.M. David Mitchell, a name given by parents who had loved him enough to try to protect him from forces they barely understood, forces that, all these years later, might still pose a threat to their son. The morning brought clearing skies and a sense of purpose. David had slept fitfully, waking at the smallest sounds, his body attuned to potential danger, even in slumber. Now, with daylight filtering through the cabin's dusty windows, he focused on the next phase of his search. The documents had yielded most of their secrets, but one detail had caught his attention during his late-night review, a notation in his father's handwriting referencing SD card, hidden in blue blanket. E.J. has instructions. E.J. Eleanor Jenkins. The blue blanket, his own baby blanket carried from the mountain, preserved all these years. David examined the blanket carefully, running his fingers along the seams until he found it. A small, hard object sewn into the fabric, nearly imperceptible unless one knew to look for it. With his hunting knife, he carefully cut the stitches, extracting a small memory card, remarkably intact despite its long concealment. But without a device to read it, the card's contents remained inaccessible. Another reason to wait for Leave's return. The day passed slowly. David rationed the cabin's limited supplies, ventured briefly outside to gather firewood, and kept watch for any sign of intrusion or surveillance. None came. The isolation was familiar, reminiscent of his life with Samuel, though the surroundings were different, less wild, more shaped by human hands. As evening approached, his thoughts turned to the dinner he was missing at the Hayes household. By now, Sheriff Hayes would know something was wrong. David's absence, a clear signal that his investigation had moved beyond casual inquiry. The burner phone rang just after sunset, startling in the cabin's quiet. Liv's voice came through, tense and urgent. "David, are you secure?" "Yes, what did you find?" "Not over the phone. I'm on my way to you now. ETA, 20 minutes. She disconnected before he could ask more questions. David stoked the fire, prepared coffee using the cabin's camping stove, and positioned himself to watch the approach road through the window. Headlights appeared exactly 18 minutes later, bobbing along the uneven drive.